Good afternoon. Before I start my presentation, I thought I might firstly share with you what, in my opinion, is a good definition of a sinking fund or a building investment fund. So essentially, it is a fund formed by periodically setting aside money for the gradual replacement of a wasting or depreciating asset. And for the purpose of my presentation today, the asset or assets that we are concerned with or interested in are the common areas and common services of a multi-unit development. Now, many apartment owners who would have purchased apartments in, say, the last 5 years may have done so as a way of getting their foot onto the property ladder, and possibly had a short-term, say, 3 to 5 year view of their investment. And because of that, they may not have been that interested in the level of the sinking fund within their particular development. However, with the downturn, things have changed, and the correct view of a sinking fund is now becoming more of a focus. Also, perhaps in the future, we will take a similar approach to that of our European counterparts, who are far more familiar with the choice of lifestyle of living in managed and maintained communal buildings. And again, this will serve to increase the awareness of and importance of a proper sinking fund. So in terms of my presentation today, I'm going to break it down into 4 sections. Firstly, we're going to look at exactly what is a building investment fund. Next, we'll look at the scope of the building investment fund, what's included in it. Next, I'll look at the obligations for OMCs under the MUD Act 2011. And then finally, we'll look at the concept of a building investment fund report. So firstly, what is a building investment fund? Well, essentially, it's the planned long-term maintenance of a multi-unit development. So, as we all are all aware, all structures and mechanical and electrical systems have a natural lifespan, and it is inevitable that parts of the building will wear out and cease to function. As such, it is extremely important that OMCs anticipate having to replace parts of the building, such as the roofs or the windows, the fire safety systems that we just discussed, and the lifts. And there's also the cosmetic aspects, such as the repainting and recarpeting, that will have to be undertaken. This long-term maintenance needs to be carried out in a planned manner, as the cost will be substantial and will impose a heavy financial burden on each unit owner if proper planning has not been carried out at the early stage for the financing of these works. Now, because multi-unit developments are still very much a new form of living accommodation in the Irish market, I don't think we've really seen yet the significant maintenance requirements of many of the developments built in, say, the last 10 years. Now, by this I mean buildings in the last 5 to 10 years have got more complicated. We're now seeing buildings with BMS systems, integrated fire systems, district heating systems, equipment that developments 15, 20 years ago just didn't have. So not alone have we not seen the significant maintenance requirements of those, nor have we really seen the problems that will occur where such developments have not built up significant funds to replenish themselves. As a result, I believe we will see, and some of us probably already have started to see, developments deteriorate. And this will obviously have a significant impact on the capital value and saleability of units within those developments. And this doesn't just relate to repainting or recarpeting, but to the more significant works like the replacement or upgrade of roofs, life safety systems, lifts. When faced with this unplanned expenditure, currently owner management companies will have no option but to look to raise additional one-off levies to cover these works. Obviously, this can prove problematic, particularly from a collection point of view, particularly given the current economic climate. As such, owner management companies need to realise that long-term investment in their development is not only unavoidable, but essential if the value of the property is to be maintained. Owners within multi-unit developments also need to understand that the value of their unit and of the development as a whole will benefit substantially by the existence and proper funding of a building investment fund. We are already seeing potential purchasers, when looking for replies under Requisition 37, questioning and scrutinising the level of sinking fund in place within the development. And this is going to become more and more of an important factor in that potential purchaser's decision to purchase or not. Why would you buy into a 10-year-old development which hasn't been repainted or recarpeted and which doesn't have a significant sinking fund in place to deal with the major capital replacements coming down the road in the next 10 to 15 years? Consequently, not only do existing owners have an interest in the existence of the appropriate building investment fund, but so do the prospective buyers. So what generally is the scope of a building investment fund? Well, generally it will include the following building fabric elements and mechanical and electrical systems. So firstly, we have the external building fabric, so that would be the roofs, be they flat, tiled, slated, etc. You have your building facade, which could be a brick finish, a painted, rendered finish, or a monocoque finish. You have your windows, car parks, footpaths, roadways, anything not taken in charge. Next, we have our internal building fabric. So that can include our floor surfaces, mainly carpeted and tiled, walls, skirtings and ceilings, be it painted, papered, whichever the case may be. And one item that you may not think significant, but when you add them up is huge, is internal doors within developments. And there you have apartment doors, service duct doors, basement doors. They really do add up. Next, we have our life safety systems. I don't think I can add to how important they are, following on from the previous presentation, but in there we have our fire alarm systems, emergency lighting, AOVs, fall arrest systems and fire hose reels. Next, security systems. These might include intercom systems, access control systems and or CCTV systems. Next, mechanical systems, extremely expensive items such as lifts, pressurization pump sets, gates, be they vehicular and or pedestrian. And finally, we have electrical systems, which would be landlord distribution services distribution boards and general lighting. And most multi-unit developments that we all manage will have a combination of, or if not all of these items. So now that we know why there is a need for a building investment fund and what should be covered by the fund, what does the MUD Act require? And just like Niall's disclaimer earlier, this is a practical opinion on the contents of the MUD Act in relation to sinking funds. So firstly, the MUD Act provides that every OMC must establish a building investment fund or a sinking fund for the purpose of discharging expenditure reasonably incurred on the following areas. So firstly, the refurbishment of the multi-unit development. So that could be the repainting, replacement of the roof, things like that. Secondly, the improvement of the multi-unit development. So you might want to put in a new CCTV system, you may need new pump systems, items such as that. Maintenance of a non-recurring nature. So from this, we can take it that expenditure on maintenance of a non-recurring nature can be funded through the sinking fund, but only if it relates to expenditure not generally incurred in each year and is certified by the directors and approved by the members at general meeting. This could include roof repairs, emergency lighting repairs, things like that. Finally, the Act provides that you can use the sinking fund monies to seek advice from a suitably qualified person in relation to the above three items. The Act also provides that every unit owner, including a developer, who for unsold units is deemed to be an owner, is obliged to pay a contribution of €200 per unit per annum or other alternative sum as approved by the members at a general meeting. Now in this regard, the Act, and Paul touched on it earlier, it does not seem to set down the approval criteria for this as it does for the service charge budget, whereas we know for the proposed budget not to take effect, it has to be disapproved by 75% of members at general meeting. As such, where an alternative amount to the €200 per unit sinking fund contribution is being considered, it would appear, and certainly to me, that this would be deemed a special resolution and therefore would require 75% approval by members at general meeting. It is also worth noting at this point that up until Shannon stage, the provision within the bill as it was at that stage was for a minimum contribution of €200 per unit. The word minimum was obviously taken out, or other such alternative sum. And certainly our experience would show that €200 per unit for apartment schemes would very much be on the low side in order to provide for a proper fund to carry out the required maintenance over the life of the development. So why do I think this? Well, if we just take a very simple example of apartment development of 150 units, and let's say the owner management company decides and wishes to have the development repainted every 7 years. They hire a suitably qualified professional who comes in and estimates that in 7 years' time the cost of doing the repainting is going to be, say, €80,000. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing for a 150 unit development. Break that back, that's €75 per unit per annum just to have the development repainted. Now add to this that they may also wish to recarpet the development every 10 years. Using the same rationale, you're looking roughly at a contribution of €7,500 per annum to the sinking fund, or €50 per unit. So already €125 of your €200 is gone, and we haven't even considered the major items such as the life safety systems, the roofs, and the many other items as we looked at under the scope of the Building Investment Fund. And under the scope of it. Later I will discuss the requirements for a Building Investment Fund report to be carried out, and this is of particular importance in the context of this provision of the Act. The Act also provides that funds collected for the purpose of a BIF may not be utilised to pay for any non-sinking fund expenditure. Again, this is a very important provision of the Act and has the potential to cause certain cash flow issues for owner management companies, particularly at the beginning and end of their service charge years, when income through contributions to annual expenditure can be slow. And in the past, through sheer necessity, some OMCs have had no choice but to dip into their sinking fund reserves in order to fund continued services on site. And this outlet is no longer available after the 1st of April 2011. As we heard in Paul Whelan's opening address, one of the main issues facing OMCs is the collection of funds. And as such, consideration needs to be given by management companies when setting future budgets. Consideration needs to be given to this by management companies when setting future budgets, as there may be a necessity to provide for additional reserves and/or bad debt provisions to deal with this potential shortfall. Next, the Act provides that the fund must be established within 3 years of the first sale, or if the development is already in existence, within 18 months of the enactment of the Act, which would be September 2012. Now again, it's great that we now have a requirement to have a building investment fund established, but I believe that building investment funds are very much like pension funds, and that the earlier they're started, the better. As such, I believe that as professional agents, IPFMA members need to reinforce the importance of and early establishment of building investment funds to the owner management companies under your management. And going forward, OMCs should be encouraged to commence contributing to a building investment fund from day one. Next, the OMC must furnish each member an annual report including a statement of the funds to the credit of the sinking fund. Now in practice this is happening in nearly all developments that I certainly would have looked at over the last years, where within the audited accounts the building investment fund reserves are shown separate to any other reserves within the company. But again, it's important that owner management companies are made aware of the requirements under the Act to have the funds shown separately. Finally, contributions made to the sinking fund shall be held in a separate account which identifies these funds as belonging to the sinking fund. So anything that comes in for the sinking fund must immediately be transferred to this account. So in any one year you might have a service charge for a two-bed apartment of €1,600 and a contribution of €200 towards the sinking fund. So when that owner pays that €1,800, €200 must immediately be taken, put into the sinking fund account and locked away. That's a very simple example, and if all payments were like that, it would be a great job to be in. But there's obviously, it gets complicated with dealing with direct debit payments and other payment plan, type payment plans. But the concept is still the same. Every cent that comes in must be taken and put into the sinking fund account. Now, earlier in my presentation, I mentioned that one of the requirements under the Act was that each unit owner is obliged to pay a contribution of €200 per unit or other alternative sum as approved by 75% of members at a general meeting. In practice, I believe that the only persons who should propose such an alternative sum are the directors of the OMC, and they should do so only on the basis of a professionally conducted building investment fund report. Should they propose any other figure, they could potentially open themselves up to liability if the required building investment fund isn't established or is not adequate for the requirements of the development. Furthermore, as we heard from both Paul Mooney and from Darren earlier, given the new requirements with regard to new requirements for minute taking, all decisions made in respect of the sinking fund contributions will be well documented for all, including new purchasers. So what is a building investment fund report? Well, essentially, it is a report carried out by a suitably qualified professional which will assist the directors of the OMC in determining an adequate estimated annual provision based on the needs of the development over a typical cycle of 25 to 30 years. As per my earlier slides, sinking fund monies can be used to seek advice from suitably qualified professionals in relation to the multi-unit development, and the completion of a building investment fund report would certainly fall into this category. So how does such a fund work? Well, very briefly, the suitably qualified professional will review all the requirements of the development, as outlined earlier in the scope of the building investment fund. They will consider various factors and make certain assumptions to estimate typical life cycles specific to the development. These may include environmental, age, quality of equipment, standard of insulation, expected use, etc. This suitably qualified professional is thereafter able to extrapolate an estimate at today's prices over the course of the period of, say, 25 years, and the aim then is to evenly spread the annual contribution by members over the term in order to provide for the expenditure in that term and for future expenditure of items that have longer life expectancies. In this regard, the availability of Section 3 documentation is essential for establishing warranties and estimated life cycles. Now, within the 25-year cycle we're talking about, certain items such as the repainting or recarpeting may be undertaken a number of times. The life safety systems may be replaced once, and the roof may not be replaced at all, depending on the elements of it. However, a fund would still require an amount to be provided for the roof, as it will need to be replaced either in the next cycle of the report or in the following cycle. And the cycle doesn't have to be 25 or 30 years. It can be 40 years. I've seen one for 60 years. It really depends on the individual requirements of the multi-unit development in question. It is also important to bear in mind that the Building Investment Fund report is very much a living report, and condition-based monitoring would be advised, I say there every 5 to 8 years, but really every 5 years, to ensure that the fund is adequate in terms of projected collection estimates. So who should be employed to carry out this report? Well, there are two distinct sections to a Building Investment Fund report, and anyone that was at Pat McGovern's talk in October will remember this slide. Firstly, there's the planned maintenance, which is cyclical repairs and elemental replacement. And then we have the services side, which is the lifts, fire alarms, emergency lighting systems, and specialist services. As per the Act, suitably qualified professionals should be used to compile these reports, and these could include chartered building surveyors, services engineers, professionals like that. And typically, owner management companies will employ one company who would have the available expertise to undertake both sections of this report. So going back to my earlier point, in terms of the annual contribution to a sinking fund, I believe that when the Building Investment Fund report is completed, the directors of the owner's management company will be fully appraised of their multi-unit development's requirement in terms of the annual sinking fund provision required, and can make an informed proposal to members should they wish to provide for a unit amount other than the €200 as proposed in the Act. So, in summary and conclusion, as managing agents, IPFMA members need to make our clients aware of the requirements under the MUD Act for sinking funds. Our clients should be appraised of the necessity for a building investment fund. We should recommend that a building investment fund report is undertaken by a suitably qualified professional. We should advise our clients that funds collected relating to the annual sinking fund contribution must be held in a separate account and must only be expended on, and I'll list them again, the refurbishment of the development, the improvement of the development, maintenance of a non-recurring nature, and advice from a suitably qualified person in relation to the first three items. Thank you very much.